What's up, Zox fam? We're back with some more Etheria Restart. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'm sending you guys a ton of positive vibes. Now, we're going to be getting into our CBT3 progression tier list. Once again, I got to shout out those of you guys that came through to the twitch.tv/Zoxaskun to help your boy out with this. I've been in conversation with a lot of other top players. I am a top player myself on the TW version, in the top 50 on PvP. I have some of the fastest clear times in PvE. What we really tried to do was we really tried to come together with this tier list and be super level-headed about what is going to be the best choices for players as far as what's going to get you through the game, and really honestly what's going to be the most efficient. So as far as jumping into the tier list, we obviously have this going from triple S all the way down to B tier, and the factors, right? So number one was, of course, attribute. Attribute was something that we had to kind of consider because, again, that's going to be pretty important. But in the very beginning, you don't have the choice of picking a unit or team comp, I should say, for every single attribute. So we tried to make sure that some of those units were, units that just kind of don't care and they can just be used. Multi-utility kind of falls into number two there. Where else can I use them? Can I use them in 2, 3, 4, all content? So we tried to make sure we picked up some units there. Lastly, investment. By far one of the most important things. You're not going to have a crazy abundance in resources, especially nowhere near close to what we've had in the CBT. So we tried to make sure that the units that we really didn't have to put too much into and they just gave us immediate value, we also tried to tier them according to that as well. Starting off with our triple S and working our way down, Leon. By far, just probably going to be one of the first units you got to build anyway. She's excellent, right? She is going to be one of the reason attribute or red attributed units in the game. She's definitely a must build. You have no choice but to build her because there's a ton of resources that's actually locked behind her. So if you don't build her, you're actually doing your account a disservice. And I would even argue that for free to play, even if you are spending, you're going to want those resources. They're just going to help you make your account better. Now, you will have a window where you will have the opportunity to reset her. So if at the end of that, that essential quest that you go through to get all those resources, you don't like her, you don't want to use her, you can always reset her. But she does have a pretty solid kit. She has AoE, she's able to action still or turn meter still. So she can basically rotate into her S2. And then of course that's also into another AoE. And then her S1 is basically just really solid damage. And she has the ability to also lifesteal in that ability. So she's really good. I will say that you don't have to dump a whole bunch into her to really get her to work. Obviously, the more you put into her, her absorption and certain values will go up, but she's really good even just out the box as soon as you get her. And like I mentioned, you have to build her, right? So that's Leon as far as your first SSR that you get in the game. Now, next up, and I'm going to try to grab every unit to throw them in the air and make them float a little bit so you can see them, right? So we're talking about Lilith next, right? So Lilith is actually going to be another top choice. She's also technically a freebie unit you can get. Now, this is a choice unit. So she's going to be the choice of one of three, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Lilith, Shada, and Chloros. Now, Lilith is going to be the best to pick out of the three. The main reason why is because she's going to be used in basically pretty much everything. She does have the ability to AoE control. She does damage based off of HP, which again makes her super tanky. She has great survivability. And then she has a lot of innate things that don't necessarily require her to have skill ups for her to grant, say, an extra turn. She procs something called Graceful Mischief. And basically when she detonates this, it's going to be dealing damage to the target that's basically based off of 25% max HP to the target, based off her own HP. And then it also has a 75% chance to stun them as well. So stunning characters, having them stun locked means that you basically get another free turn. They don't get to go. And because she has also action delay, so she's able to basically slow characters. She has a speed down in her S2. She's still going to be building up and basically pushing back characters with the Graceful Mischief. And then, of course, with the S1, she does a little bit of single target damage. And then she also has a chance to grant herself an extra turn in the S1. So she's really insane. She's really, really insane. I would say most of the content in the game, she's probably one of the top ranked characters, period, in the entire game, right? So again, very, very solid unit. She's going to be the best choice out of the three. And yeah, I would even say I may do without her on my test account, but she by far is the character that I'm like, I wish I would have actually snagged her because she has so much value. Going on to our third unit, this is another freebie unit that you get after 7 days. So there's a reason why there's still some units that are going to be tiered up here, even though she is probably the best healer, in the game. There's still going to be some other characters that are going to be tiered up with her because again, she is 7-day login, right? Now you can technically pull her earlier, but that's just kind of up to RNG or if you decide to reroll. But Ling Lao she's actually very broken. Okay. Ling Lao is actually going to be a unit that out the box gives you a lot of value, right? S3, she's able to AoE heal and grant immunity to your entire party. Basically, for each buff they also have, she's able to increase the healing efficiency or potency that she has. So she works really well on buff-oriented teams. Her S2 is also another heal over time, and then also a speed up buff. So this is another reason as to why I'm pretty happy that they decided to give this character as a freebie because she's just insane. And then, of course, with her S1, she also heals the target with the lowest HP. So that ends up kind of helping you keep people alive. She also has something called Well Prayer. So it basically is like a heal over time, like a unique heal over time, which basically heals the target or heals herself really for 5% max HP at the start of a turn, and it can stack up to 5 times. So that can go all the way up to 30%, which is pretty massive once you get her built up. So she's a straightforward healer, but again, because she is able to grant that immunity that can prevent you from getting debuff, stun, silence. She works in PvP. And that's the other thing too. The other two choices the other two units I mentioned also work well in PvP as well. So just wanted to kind of throw that in there. Rahu. Now, Rahu, I just recently personally tested, and this guy is disgusting. He's basically a tank damage dealer with a whole bunch of buffs, right? He has a whole bunch of buffs. He has some debuffs. And more importantly, I would say the focal point is the buffing that he does. So he's basically able to grant a defense up to his entire party. But the main thing with him is that he has a follow-up buff that operates off of a passive that he has that gives him an ability called Rage. Now with the Rage, it's basically with each layer of it, which it can stack up to 12 times, it's going to give him a ton of defense per layer. So it's 4% per layer. And then the thing is that when they basically I guess when your allies go, or when you have a ally on a team with him go, there's a 40% chance that he will consume one of his layers and he will basically do a pursuit attack. But keep in mind that all his damage is going to be scaling off of his defense, so he can actually hit pretty hard. And then the other thing is too, what they gave him in his S1 was a defense down of 60%. So keep in mind, he's following up with his S1, so he's proccing his own defense break, and then he's going to be, again, hitting, and then your ally that's hitting is also going to be taking advantage of that defense down. So he's really good in team comps. He keeps you alive longer. And I think that that's one of the great things about him is that he also has the ability to transfer debuffs too in his kit. So dude is just really insane. He's one of the newer characters that they added into the game, and I feel like his value is extremely high. And a lot of these things he kind of just does, right? You could definitely put a very, very beginner-oriented gear set on him, and he's going to just work, right? He is not a freebie, but he is a unit that you can technically reroll for. Next in the list, we have Close. Close is going to be the first rate up banner unit in the game. Close is actually very, very, very broken. Okay. She's really good simply because, one, she has a AoE defense break in her S3. She also has the ability to proc something called Hacking Progress, which is going to make it to where target speeds are reduced. They take more damage. And this is just from that one ability, mind you, right? So they take more damage. Their speed is reduced. She's insane. Okay. Then she also has, if you guys are watching this and you play Dislight, it's like a character named T. She has the ability to absorb action gauge and redistribute it to her party. So she can steal it and then give it to her party. And then, of course, all while she's still going to be proccing the hacking progress. Now, of course, with that, with the hacking progress, depending on how many stacks that she actually has, she's going to be able to additionally reduce how much damage is dealt and decrease how much speed they're going down by. So she's really, really insane. And then the other thing is too, is it won't be it can't be purified, so they can't take it off. So yeah, it's kind of nuts. Then, of course, in the S1, she's also able to keep stacking that hack in progress. So she just kind of works into her unique ability quite a bit. And honestly, this is another character that's going to be like, built like a support, pretty tanky. She can do some solid damage considering that she is a support, but she is going to work extremely well in a lot of these team comps, even if she's at attribute disadvantage, which is one of the nice things about her. But yeah, she's going to be definitely a focus target for a lot of people, and definitely a unit I would recommend. We got Tiamat. Now, Tiamat is actually really important because, so I started using Tiamat as a supplement support for heals because I didn't have a really good healer, throughout my progression. And she was like one of the first units I got that was able to kind of keep me alive, do some damage. And then she just offers so much value. So she has an AoE taunt in her AoE. She also has her AoE taunt, her AoE, and her S3. Then in her S2, she has a shield and a heal over time AoE, okay? And that shield is super, super insane because the shield is based off of how much HP she consumes. So she is a unit that takes away her own HP. And that might be scary to some people, but I promise you, she is probably one of like the most tuned units when it comes to that sort of gimmick. She also has an ability called Bloodshed. And with each layer that basically is added, she increases how much healing she receives back, and it cannot be dispelled. Now, also with the S1, she does some pretty solid damage in that. And this is going to be building up that stack. Now, the cool thing is that she is one of the only units in the game that has a full form transformation. Now, with this transformation, she goes into her mother dragon form. And in that form, she basically has one skill and is an AoE nuke, essentially. And in that, ability, she's just going to be nuking all day. And it's going to be based off of the damage, or the damage is going to be based off of how much HP she lost. And every single time she gets her turn, and she's also like much faster, she hits harder. She's really, really good. She's going to be able to restore that HP that she keeps losing back up while she's in that form. So she's really, really good. So she has the life still in that AoE, which is just kind of nuts. And then she does crazy damage. So you give her a defense break, people are dead. Like, she's really, really good. But she also offers sustain, which is another thing that is kind of like that extra layer of value. So she's going to be a really, really nicely slotted unit to really helping you sustain and keep your teams alive, but also able to add value as far as doing damage. This is going to be a dark type unit, so you will have to reroll for him technically, but he is more than likely, I would say for most players, you're going to probably end up rolling or re-rolling for a light or dark character. This is Hinrich. So Hinrich is actually one of the like OG ones, the Godslayer guns is what they call them. But his S3 is insane. I think he probably has one of the scariest S3s in the game. It's an AoE buff block. He has an ability to lock down characters, but then he also has a skill called Last Words. So basically when he crits, damage taken and crit chance increased by 7%, and it goes up 4 times. So it's 4-layer stack. So he's able to do a crazy amount of damage. He can heal block on his S2 AoE. So that, of course, like just goes all the way up against and mitigates heals and healers. And then, of course, with his S1, he's able to apply lock. So basically, he's able to also dispel who's under that lockdown or that lock ability. He's able to dispel buffs from them. So that's the other thing that makes him kind of crazy. And then, of course, that Last Word, which is going to be increasing the crit damage and the crit chance that he has against that target, is also increasable by his S1. So he's just insane. But like, mind you, he's really good on Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is going to be a struggle point for a lot of people, and he can actually help you completely destroy that. Like, he is actually really, really good for that. Now, ironically, I put him next to the character that is somebody you're going to have to, consider dealing with in Chapter 10, but that's going to be Hellkid. Okay, so Hellkid right here is also another unit that I think is going to give you a lot of value in the very beginning of the game. The other thing is, too, is that, like I said, all the characters we mentioned so far, you don't have to go so crazy. Like, yes, skill investment on them is very nice, but you don't have to go so crazy to get them to work, right? So Hellkid is another unit that I feel like is going to be like pretty broken in the game. He has his own unique immunity buff called Shroud Barrier. So it's a barrier and an immunity buff put in one, right? So basically what it does is it absorbs a certain amount of damage, and you cannot debuff anything while he's under that, or any of him and his allies are under that barrier. They can't be debuffed. So it's kind of insane, okay? Now, the thing is that the barrier is based off of his attack. So yes, he's an attack-based DPS or like support DPS. Then he also has an AoE attack down. Now, the thing is that if he has Shroud Barrier on, his damage then goes up from his S2 by 50%, which is kind of insane. And then to just give more injury or insult to injury or injury to insult. I forgot how that saying goes, but either way, they gave him an ability where basically he's able to stun in the S1, right? So he can stun in his S1. If he's under the Shroud Barrier, basically he will have an additional 35% damage added to that attack. So yeah, the dude is disgusting. He's really, really good. And I'm not talking about like, actually, I would even say this, right, to just kind of emphasize how good his barrier is. Tiamat, in my opinion, is like the barrier character. I feel like he has a much better barrier than she does, which is crazy. So yeah, super, super insane. Now, next character we have up here is Doki Doki. Okay, so Doki Doki is definitely probably one of the best light dark units in the game, period. I'll say she's a little bit of a cheat code. S3, action gauge increase, okay? She has her own unique ability with it. So basically it's called a data stream, and it cannot be dispelled. So basically with that, it's data stream within a skill called backup. So basically with that, it's going to make it to where debuffs debuffs take action, and she's able to consume these stacks, where she's then able to remove those debuffs from the unit. So she can cleanse all debuffs basically off someone. And then the data stream is going to be basically a speed buff. So this makes her have value in PvP and PvE, where you're getting a 2.5% damage increase and a 2.5 speed increase up to 12 times, and it cannot be dispelled. So if I had to compare her to any character in the game, she reminds me a lot of Ethan from Dislike, right? And that was kind of like that premier character. You just always paired him up with someone because they gave that extra value and utility to the entire team. Now the S2 has the speed up buff. So again, that paired up with the data stream is pretty insane because she's giving more speed. And then she also has her own unique speed buff and damage buff that's going to also be helping people. And then, of course, with the S1, she's also going to be stacking and building up the backup buff, which is going to be essentially helping you proc more of those data streams potentially, and just becoming stronger and faster. So yeah, she's really, really good. Moving on, we're now on Rin. So Rin is now jumping into our SR. So every unit that we mentioned was a SSR so far. She's the first SR that we're going to talk about here. Now Rin is probably like one of my favorite units in the game. It's another unit I used in CBT2. CBT3, they just hate me, so they're not trying to give me her, but she's still broken. Now she basically has an AoE control. She's able to taunt, attack down just in her S3 alone. So yeah, she's really, really insane. It's really high chances. She does some pretty solid damage. It's like 160%, which isn't the craziest amount, but it's still solid enough to be effective to add to what you might already be doing. Then they gave her the ability to buff, so she can give defense up and also shield to your entire party. And that shield is based off of 240% of her defense. So of course, when you're talking about having the defense up, having the base defense on her, she's going to be really, really good, right? She's going to be tanky. She's going to have that survivability innately. But then she's also going to be offering value. You're taking less damage while she increases, basically the bulk that your team has, including what she is able to bulk and take down. And then the S1 also has the ability to taunt as well. Now, the one thing I want to mention here, the reason why she's so good, even though she technically does have a taunt as her AoE control ability, taunt is probably one of the very few abilities that still works on all bosses. As of the CBT3, taunt works on all bosses, right? Now, the thing that I will say is exempt from that is like the Union boss, and I think there's one other boss, but usually the other bosses, and this was another factor, this is why you probably have mentioned or have heard me mention DOT or poison. That is the reason why my poison units aren't in Triple S, because there's literally content where they just don't work, right? They're great, but there's content where they just don't work. She does, right? So again, Super insane unit, and that's why I had to tier her up in triple S there. Next unit we have here is Siia. Now, this is going to be SR Siia. Keep in mind there is an SSR Shadow Siia, but we'll talk about her in a second. But SR Siia is going to be definitely one of your top healers in the entire game. She is definitely different than Ling Lao. Ling Lao is just a straight up healer, grants immunity. She's really good, right? But Siia also has the ability to revive, okay? So she's able to revive, but she also has an ability called All Powerful Protection. So she's able to increase characters, including herself, their max HP, right? And this can stack up to 3 times. It's 20% per stack, and it cannot be dispelled. So that's insane. So 20%, the 60% layer stacking is nuts. And then she can also revive. Now, she also has an AoE passive that will proc occasionally, where she's going to be able to AoE heal. And then she can also action gauge increase herself, which is just going to get her to return much quicker to be able to be a better support in her S1, right? Again, investment in her is great. And now we're talking about SR. So investment's going to be a lot easier in comparison to the SSRs. So even if you start investing in her skills, she has some really good investment that you can make into her. So she's great. She's absolutely great. Now, next up we have is Gray. So Gray is another one of those freebie characters that you get in the very beginning of the game. He's also an SR character. Now, he does a couple of different things that is going to be really good for you. He has an AoE defense break, but not only that, the way his AI works, it uses his S2 technically first, which is a crit rate up buff. And then after he uses the crit rate up buff for the entire party, then he'll use his AoE defense break. So he basically is enabling your team to essentially do more damage, right? And then of course he's able to increase his own action bar off of his S1. So this is going to really promote follow-up builds and stuff like that for him because he gets more action gauge push if he crits. And because he does supply himself with his own crit, he's actually also going to be another solid choice for AoE nuking. He does a good amount of damage, and considering he's an SR, he's even out damaging some of the like SSRs that should be out damaging him. And then he doesn't nearly require as much investment. So he's really good. Next on the list, we actually have here is Chiaki the Vile. Now, Chiaki is really insane. She's probably going to be a unit that is just predominantly used throughout the entire game, primarily because of her S3. So her S3 grants an attack up, and then it also is going to allow her to turn meter push everybody by 20%. Now, the thing is that she also gives a ability called Hymn of Madonna, and this makes it to where you become immune to action bar pushback. Stilling of effects do not work. And then you also are able to increase her, or she is able to increase her allies' action bar by an additional 6% at the end of their turn while they're under this buff. So this buff is super broken, okay? And this is like the value that you just get from her off rip. The other cool thing too is that she does have a passive that allows her to be able to grant more of the Hymn of Madonna, grant some additional attack buffs to allies, and then the S1 is going to be a debuff cleanse. Right. So very straightforward, really solid unit. Now, the next unit here we have is Valyrian. Valyrian is probably going to be one of your other like last like top healers that you can pick up and just be fine in the game. She does healing a little bit different. She's very similar to a character like in Dislight named Leon. What she has basically is something called Deep Slumber. And Deep Slumber is going to basically be a HP redistributing ability. But also she then grants something called Hazy Dream. While in that effect, she cannot be debuffed. So she's well, technically she can be debuffed, but she can't be debuffed by action control abilities or action bar effects do not affect her. Now, she's also going to be granting a 2-turn shield equal to 15% of her HP. And basically with that, she's also going to be able to heal an ally right before they die, 50% of their max HP, and then it will take her out of the Hazy Dream. So it's very similar to Leon if you play Dislight. Now, the other thing is too, is she gives something called Basic Buff. And the Basic Buff, it's okay because it's random, so you can't really pick what it is, but it will either give an attack, defense, crit rate up, or speed buff to the allies that are under essentially that shield effect of her Hazy Dream. Now, the cool thing is that she can also grant invincibility to one ally and a heal over time to them. And then she also has a single target ability in the S1 where she is able to force someone to sleep at a 40% chance. So she's really good. I would definitely say, like, as you start getting, her skills up, she can actually proc her Hazy Dream in the very beginning of the fight, which is going to be super insane. So it kind of is like that R2 like kind of vibe in a little bit of ways, but again, it's still really good. So that's basically everybody in Triple S. Double S is going to consist of some extremely powerful units, but there's a couple of stipulations. They're not necessarily going to be the best right away, like jumping into the game, give you the most progression push. They're not necessarily going to give that. With some investment, though, they can be very good. They also might be, if they're tiered here, there might also be some niche picks. Some of the units also will be good in conjunction to other units. And I think because there are units that give you that value in Triple S, they had to be tiered lower just because they're technically not on the same level. But the first unit here is Lily. And actually, Lily, I might move up because Lily is actually really, really insane. And she's a SSR, mind you. So this is a character that you can technically reroll for. And she is a dark character. Now, she's actually technically the better version of another character I really like named Kazami. She's able to cooldown reduce abilities, AoE. Now, the thing is that she has a 70% chance to extend all skill cooldowns by 1 turn, and then she can immediately reset all skill cooldowns for all allies that are under her bunny trick. So the bunny trick is a unique passive ability that she has that basically increases her action bar and whoever is also under it by 40%. She can only apply this effect to one target other than herself during that turn, and then if she dies, this effect just completely goes away. Now, on top of that, she's able to grant a speed up buff. She gives a crit damage up buff as well. So I'm gonna move her up. I'm gonna move her up because Lily actually is pretty solid. Like, I'm not even gonna sit here and do that. We're moving Lily up because there's another character, Kazami, that does some of the stuff that she does, but it's a little different. We're gonna move her up. But with that, she's basically going to be giving you all of that value. I'll definitely say with the S1-2 action bar increase, and then basically if she has whoever she puts under the twin bunny trick, they're going to also be able to pursue attack with her. So it's really insane how she works. I think she's a really, really solid unit. I don't think she's going to be used as much as some of the other units that we mentioned beforehand, but she definitely is a very, very top tier unit. Like, she's definitely up there. Getting into the actual double S here, we're gonna start out with Siia. Right? Yeah, we're going to start with Siia here. This is Shadow Siia. Now, Shadow Siia is very interesting. I personally would have loved to have had her in Triple S, but like I mentioned, the gimmick of the game is that there are characters that just don't work in certain things, and it's because she's a DOT unit. Now, DOT damage is great. It's actually very insane when it does work, but there are a lot of pieces of content where DOT just doesn't work, right? So she is a DOT stacking, DOT detonator unit. She also can extend debuffs with her S2. She detonates with her S3. She can apply debuffs with her S2 as well, on top of extending. And then her S1 is an insane debuff stacking of that DOT. So she's really, really good. She technically will be top tier in game. I would say like late mid game going into end game, she's top tier. She's actually the reason why I have some of the fastest clears in some content, right? The content that she does work in, she's presenting and offering some of the fastest clear, period. So again, I want to reiterate, she's a great unit, but she's not going to have that immediate beginner progression value to you because there's just going to be content where she gets locked out of it, right? Obol, same thing. Obol is same thing, right? So this is this old guy right here. Obol is another unit that's also going to be extremely insane, but he also gets locked out of content because he's also a DOT damage dealer. Now, the thing that's different about him, though, is that he's able to dot and stun. So That's basically going to be his S3. The S2 is going to be something called Hydro Beam. And with the Hydro Beam, he's going to be able to convert 2 buffs at max from whoever he's hitting, which is AoE, and he's going to be able to convert them into dot damage, right? But again, if you're in something where dot damage doesn't work, you won't even have that conversion anyway, right? And then, of course, with the S1, he also applies more stacks of dots. So he's really insane. I use him in PvP. My defense is like basically almost unbeatable with this dude on here. He's really fast. He's really, really a solid unit, but he's just not going to be great all the way around in the very beginning, okay? Nyang, okay, so Nyang is actually pretty solid. And this is like, you know, kind of considering like SSRs. He's another freebie potential unit because there is going to be a character box that you get. It's going to consist of Yang, Siia, and I'm trying to think who else. I think it's Durand or Turendo or something like that is her name. They're going to be like second and third choice. Siia is going to be the first choice, and she's the healer that we mentioned in Triple S. But Yang is basically going to be able to give a action increase with his S3. He also has the opportunity to single target Dispel as well. So if he crits, it's going to be good for that. So that's one of the things that you can use for things like Chapter 10, for example. He's going to be pretty solid there as a potential Dispel choice. But the action bar increase that he does is only 10%, right? So there's a lot of other characters that are just much better for that. So you would never use him as your action bar increaser necessarily, as like that's his job. You wouldn't probably do that. What I will say you could use him for is his S2, which also is providing AoE and attack up and crit rate up buff. And so that's another like really important piece of content value that you're going to be getting from him is also that buff with his attribute, right? And then in the S1, it's going to also allow him, when he crits, to increase his own action bar by 20% every time he crits. So he's really solid, but he just isn't going to be one of the characters that you necessarily need to use until maybe Chapter 10, and then you don't really necessarily have to put so much into him. You just need him to be able to dispel for you. Now, next up, we have Dina, okay? Dina is actually really good. I use her for quite a bit, but she's definitely going to be a unit that kind of, I would say not really goes up like or falls into trouble, but she's just gonna not be necessary. The reason why is because she's gonna be a reason attribute, and there's so many reason attributes that you're gonna be building, or red attributes that you're gonna be building, and there's also other units you're gonna have in your team that's applying the effects that she has. The one thing I will say though is that she has a couple of different abilities that still make her very insane, but much later down the line, I feel like you're going to get more value out of her. So S3, defense break, AoE. You have the vulnerability in the S3 as well. So it increases damage by 30%, which is pretty disgusting. And then you also have the corrosion. So basically when you crit, the next time you crit, essentially, it will take 1 stack of corrosion and it will add 40% true damage to the ability. And then also increase the attacker's action bar by 8%. So you basically would need all this stuff to be proccing in order for her to really give you value. And I would definitely say like that with the damage boost that she actually gets in the S2, and the fact that she can also still action bar with her S1, she's actually a very, very good unit. But most of her skills is based around single targeting. And the other thing is too, is that that's another thing that you'll notice that a lot of the other units in Triple S offer is a lot of AoE, right? There really, really is a lot of content where you need AoE, and single target isn't necessarily the answer. So I think that that's also another thing as to why she's not Triple S. But she is still very much so an excellent, Animus. Now, Kazami, okay? Kazami is another unit that I actually like quite a bit. She's not going to have initial value, I feel like, for a lot of accounts, but I'm telling you, as soon as you get out of early game into mid game, maybe even like late early game, she's going to be nuts. So the thing is, she's a low investment cooldown reduction unit. And the thing is that she's not only going to be offering you a cooldown reduction, but she also gives you a speed up buff in her S3. Now, she does reduce all cooldowns by 1 turn, but she also has the ability to dispel a single target, though, with her S2. And she can also, in that same skill, increase the cooldowns for the enemy target that she's hitting. And then the S1 is going to be a speed down, so it's going to be preventing some sort of slow. So she has some good abilities, but they're more of like niche slotting. You're not going to necessarily have her in everything. unless you're using a very, very specific teams where you're trying to have those cooldowns. Like she can help out a ton with that, especially if you don't also have certain shells in play either. So she can definitely make a lot of teams work better because she's able to reduce their cooldowns, but she's not going to be one of those you must build right away. And I would even argue that she's going to give you more value later, but I've been using her quite a bit, and she's kind of disgusting. Now, we have next up here, Kachi the Guard. So Kachi the Guard, another unit that I think a lot of people have slept on. He's actually really good. He does have the ability in his S3. He's able to give you a defense up with immunity. And there's kind of a stipulation to his proccing of that immunity. It's basically when his effect accuracy is at a certain amount. I think it's 80% or something like that. He's able to trigger something called success and great success. And so a lot of this stuff is based off of his effect accuracy. So you need a ton of effect accuracy on him in order to make these abilities work. But this is also because he's able to action delay, as well as do some, speed down, right? So he also speed down, action bar, pushback. So he offers that in his S2. And then in the S1, he's going to be able to crit rate down, so he can reduce crit rate, which again, you're not really seeing that from a whole bunch of units, so that can be very valuable. But again, a lot of his stuff is also single target, so it's probably a little bit better from what I found in PvP, but it is still something that can be of use to you, considering that he is a unit that can grant you immunity, but there just are other choices that you'll have for that immunity that he just can't compare to, right? Now, next up, we got Fang, okay? So Fang is probably the last SR in the double S tier. Fangus is really his name, but he's also another dot unit, right? So I'm not really going to go too crazy with him. Dot S3, speed down in the S3 as well. He has a passive where he's able to follow up, and essentially he's going to be following up anytime his allies attack with a damage ability, and then that S1 is going to be allowing him to proc more dots, right? But again, the issue or the dilemma he's going to come across is if dot doesn't work, he doesn't work, right? So it's very similar to Obol. It's very similar to Shadow Siia. If they don't have anywhere to use their dots, they just don't work. Now, number 41 is going to be one of our first R rarity units we're going to be talking about. Number 41 is actually very good. She's a character that I would argue is actually going to be probably an insane paired unit with Chiaki the Vow, because of the fact that she's able to manipulate and move action bar. So in her S3, which is kind of insane, she's able to push all her allies by 35% action bar. So that with an attack up is kind of insane. She has a heal over time, single target in the S2, and then she's also able to single target heal block with her S1. So this is actually a very valuable, very, very super cheap character to build up. But she is going to be one of those niche picks to just kind of help you out. Like if you're having trouble with rotating or getting a turn, she's definitely going to work really well in 5 party comps, just because you'll be able to kind of still have some of the main things that you need slotted for a role, but she's good, right? Now, next up, we have Ashu, okay? This is our last one in double S. Ashu is actually really good. I've tested this character quite a bit personally. This dude's kind of disgusting. I've surprised a lot of people. Has AoE silence in the S3, which is really, really good. He has a AoE, and he also, of course, falling into that same bracket of DOT. His S2 is a DOT AoE. And of course, if DOT doesn't work, he doesn't work. And then same thing with his S1. His S1, he's going to be able to inflict speed down, which again does give him some value there. But because of the fact that his kit kind of does diminish because silence can sometimes not work in content. It's only taunt, not silence. And then his AoE cannot work with the DOT. So you'll sometimes in some cases have where his S2 and his S3 just don't work, right? So that's just kind of what's up against him. But he's really, really good, can shut down characters. He does very solid damage for him to be an R rarity unit. So that is that. Now, next up, we have Biotin. So I got a shout out to No One's, Oh No's. I said No One's. Oh No's for that. Because Biotin is actually very, very good late game. and more so manual. And this is something that I think like a lot of people think she's going to be super broken because she has so much stuff in her kit, which yes, she does, right? Attack up in the S3, crit rate up, or crit damage up in the S3. She also has the flower for the underworld. So that basically makes it to where with each stack of that, going to be taking a damage reduction. And then basically after each action for every fallen ally that she has, she consumes 1 stack of this to revive them. And she can restore them with 35% max HP and then boost her action bar by 65%. So unfortunately, her AI is pretty dumb right now. It doesn't really target and do things in the manner that would make her kit flow or operate the best that it possibly could. So you have to play her manually because also in the S2, you also have the ability to get a cooldown reduction. But again, it's great. Like she's top tier on manual, but if you're autoing content, she just drops a lot, right? And then on the S1, she also has the ability to increase the action bar of the ally with the lowest action bar by 20%. So she's great as a reviver. She works extremely well in PvP. I feel like she's going to be great in RTA. That's like primarily where I've seen her a ton, but not really so much in PvE content where you're really going to have to primarily progress. She just doesn't have a smart AI. I think if she had a better AI or if we were able to control that a little bit more, she would actually be a lot better for, for doing those dungeons, which there's a ton of content for us to clear. Now, Shada is going to be our next SSR here. Shada, compared to CBT2, she's not a direct, just crazy damage dealer. She needs a ton of buffs, okay? She does have an AoE defense break, which again, you already technically have someone that's cheaper and just better at it, right? That's going to be accessible to you. She has a not an S2, but it's a passive ability where she's able to accumulate something called Soul Flames. And basically the Soul Flames, with each evolution she gets, she increases her attack by 20%, and it can evolve up to 3 times, and it cannot be dispelled. So with that, that is technically something that will come as she accumulates 3 buffs, right? So each time she gets 3 buffs, she will be able to increase this. But that's the thing, is that if you have enough chances to rotate and give enough buffs, then yeah, she can do a solid amount of damage. But there's a lot of units that don't require any of that are just going to give you the direct damage, right? And then on top of that, you also have the buff steal that she offers in the S1. The S1 is going to be able to allow her to do a little bit of damage, but really I would say the buff stealing is at an 80% chance, which is really good at max. But the investment, I think, for Shada is going to be the biggest thing, right? Like a lot of her kit requires heavy investment. So it's not that she's not good. It's just that she needs to be on a super built team that's able to revolve buffs enough so that she can build up her damage quick enough and so that she can be useful to the team. Otherwise, it's just going to take too long and she's just not going to offer you that utility. So that's going to be that. All right. Now, moving on. Our next SSR we're going to be taking a look at is Turndot. So Turndot is our Chakram user here. Hold on, let me pick her up so you can see who I'm looking at, right? She's our Chakram user. She's actually pretty solid. She has the ability to give you an attack up and defense up in her S3. She has a action delay, single target in her S2, which is decent, right? 35% pushback, but again, you would rather have an AoE because there's a ton of AoE-oriented content. And then she also has the ability to dispel in the S1. She's really solid, I think, for like ISO picking character bosses, stuff like that, where it's just like one target. But that's if her effects work on them. The attack up and defense up is great, but I would argue you can also just get that from a character that can also do a whole bunch of other stuff too. So yeah, she's solid, but I definitely wouldn't say she's a character you would want to build right in the beginning. Now, moving on, we got Kraken. Kraken is our first freeze character and only freeze character in the entire game. I would say with him, he's actually pretty solid for AoE control and locking down, but once again, he'll fall into the dilemma of freeze just not being applicable in content. Now, the other thing is that his other abilities are also single target, and like I mentioned before, you're really going to be looking for a lot of AoE damage, AoE lockdown, AoE pushback, those are the things that you're really looking for to deal with the ads and the enemies in the game, especially once you start going into content where there's 1 and 2 waves, right? That's really where you're going to start really like seeing how this really matters, right? Now, the other thing is that with him being able to freeze, he does have the ability to guarantee a freeze because he also can action gauge pushback. And if the target is at 0 action gauge, then he gets a guaranteed freeze on them. So he's very much so like Medusa, if you want to kind of think of that like character. So that's going to probably fall off just in terms of how that works. I feel like he's going to work really well when they finally add another freeze oriented unit that's maybe able to do damage off of a unit being frozen. He'll probably be insane at that point. Now, we also have RC77. RC77, I had to do a little testing with. I feel like he is a very, very solid S tier choice unit. He does have the ability to stun and also inflict defense down and attack down with his S3. Now, keep in mind, it is a single target ability that will have a chance to stun, but then it becomes an AoE with the final hits that it does, where then it will inflict attack down and defense down, right? So it's a multi-hit ability, but the first hit or first segment is where you get the stun single target. The second, third hit is where you're actually going to be getting the attack down and defense down to the enemies he's hitting. Now, of course, with that, you also have the ability on a single target to be able to action delay. So he can do some pushback with his S2. I mean, he can also extend debuffs with his S2 as well. Accuracy up in the S1. So I think he's the first character that can actually accuracy up in the game. So that's going to be that. But it's also for himself, right? So it's a little bit of a selfish buff. So no utility to your party really, but he's still really solid for those extra debuffs. Now we have regular Chiaki. Regular Chiaki is actually really good. I feel like when we get into much harder content, Chiaki is going to be amazing because she has something called Origami Him. And Origami Him is basically a damage reduction ability with also a heal, right? So Origami Guardian is basically when you're attacked by a skill, you consume a stack and it further reduces the damage you take by 35%, and it can stack up to 5 times. So it is kind of insane how it works. She does offer in the S2 another stacking of the Origami Guardian, which is just basically more damage reduction. And then she is able to single target heal with the S1. So it is really a good ability, but a lot of her stuff is single heals, a single, damage reduction. So it's a little bit less utility oriented for your entire party. It's like kind of more isolated to like if you're in PvP, which I've seen her a ton in. She's able to kind of keep a character that's being targeted a lot alive, right? So again, can work in PvE, really solid unit, but not for the overall progression of your account. Now, we're finally into A rank, okay? Sorry guys, my nose has been like stuffy a little bit, but we're powering through this, okay? Now, we got A rank here, and unfortunately, the units here in A rank, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to go too deep into these characters, but the biggest issue that they have is that they're either not performing enough, there's too much investment that's required to get them to work for you in the beginning, or they just suck, right? So Chloros, we're just going to kind of fireball these a little bit. Chloros, simply put, he's also one of the first starter characters that you can pick up. He's the worst one to pick. He's not going to give you a lot of value. He's a single target damager. The way his S3 works, it's something Reaper. You have to basically hit 12 times, and every time you proc the 12th hit, it will proc his S3. 12 hits is a lot, right? So it can work in certain things like Union, but I couldn't justify you picking him as a character in the very beginning just for Union fight. There's tons of other team comps and units that can work for that. So I would say that also with that, he can extinct units, which he's basically a revive counter, but the amount of damage he does, his modifiers are just like so low. He should be wrecking people, especially if they're trying to sit there and revive. So yeah, they might need to revisit him somewhat, but I feel like the main issue we really are having with him is that I think he does really truly need a super in-game build in order for him to be valuable, right? Now, next up is going to be Messiah. Same thing. Messiah was super broken in CBT2, but in CBT3, I don't feel like he does enough damage. The other thing is, too, he's high investment, so you do have to full send invest into him, and I'm talking about skill ups, getting him to level 50, You're going to want all of that. Also, an in-game build, because you're not really seeing enough value out of the ignored defense that he does. It's not hitting as hard, even with a defense break. His modifier for his S3 is not nearly as high as some other units that aren't even DPS. So, yeah, they got to probably revisit him too. But all in all, I will definitely say that Messiah's problem really isn't so much that it's necessarily he's bad. I just think that it's a high investment character. So he's not going to be a great choice in the very beginning. Again, these are, Messiah is a light character, so there is that. Chloris is a reason or red character, so, you just have to kind of take that for what it is. But next we have Dorothy. Dorothy actually is pretty solid in the very beginning if you have no other healers, which I would say if you're rerolling, you're going to have another healer. She's going to have better value for you in game. And that, of course, is just considering that a lot of her stuff scales off of attack. You're just going to get a lot more value out of that, just even down to how much healing she can do. It's not nearly as much as the other ones. She's not, dispelling anything. It's just straight up heal over time. And she has one cleanse, in her S2. But again, we're talking about AoE for prevention or dispelling. And there's a ton of other characters that can do that, right? Now, Sybil, same thing. She just has a whole bunch of single target stuff, nothing really of value that someone else can't do. I know that she has attack down in her kit. It's attack down and defense down, I think it is, that she can do. Or sorry, defense down and then a speed up buff. But that's all for herself, right? So it's all single target. The defense down also only targets one enemy too. So you're not really going to be using her. They give you her in the very beginning, but she's going to fall off extremely fast. Kachi, another AoE unit that you can utilize for AoE control, but keep in mind how many AoE control units we mentioned. There's just so many other units that just do it better. So there's no point in realistically, using him. There's no point. If you're going to reroll and you're going to get some of these other AoE control units, you're just never going to use them. Until maybe Ethernet Decree, which at that point you'll be at endgame, right? Or closer to endgame. Viper is a counter control unit. He can dispel AoE. I did test him out. He needs a full send endgame build. He definitely does. And I think that that's one of the things with him, that he's a really fun character to use, but he's not going to be great for you starting out. You have, I think it's Sutomu. This is Oberol's brother. He's all single target. That's the biggest downside to him. He's more ISO. And he's all single target. That's the main thing with him. So he can buff still. He can do crazy heal blocks, lockdown, so he can block buffs. But just as far as overall progression, pushing, he looks so freaking sick, but he's not going to be a character that you necessarily are going to be using. The Ting, same thing. He's a single target monster, but again, he's not offering you anything else other than his follow-ups and his raw damage that he does. So that's kind of where he kind of falls down the list, right? It's just follow-ups. I think he gives a crit rate up buff for himself. So that, with also then having a converting crit damage ability as well, he can proc, I think, vulnerability as well. So he just basically does everything to scale his own damage. Nothing to really offer more utility to your party. So he could definitely be a unit that you would build in, for stuff later on, but not in the very beginning. Obol, similar story, different character, right? Different skin here. She's another single target unit, action delay instead in her S3, defense down in her S2, and then she can also inflict bleeds with speed down. So she is one of the first and only bleed characters in the game. But I will say that because everything on her is single target, that's just a huge waste of a turn. You'd rather somebody else do something that's AoE or AoE, utility, support, or damage, so that you can work down the enemies instead of targeting one at a time, right? And then also bleed is like a DOT, where in a lot of content, it's not going to work, right? Now, Victor, same thing. Victor's very, very selfish. He's like a tank down character, single target shield for himself. He's able to consume his HP, basically where he consumes it to convert it into shield is how it kind of works for him, which could be very good. I feel like Victor is a unit that will work really well as one of those tank down characters in PvP, but I don't think he's really that great for PvE at this point. And that's just what it is, right? Now, all the characters in B, these are Andrew shields. We're not really going to go too deep into them. They're just garbage. Like, there's no need for you to use them. You have a plethora of other characters here that just give you way more value. And then, of course, Vice is another character. Single target, heal, cleanse, all that stuff that you can just get from someone else, right? Taunt, single target. Like, it's nothing that's really giving you overall utility. So that's basically that for B, right? Now, that's going to be the entirety of the tier list, guys. I will say that all in all, through and through, this is the progression tier list. If you want the biggest bang for your buck, I would personally say you don't want to go any lower than S rank as far as reroll targets. I'm going to have a separate reroll guide when we are able to see the game officially, so that you guys can kind of get an idea of how things kind of work, how they are organized, etc. So yeah, guys, that's basically going to be that with this one. I hope that this was a little bit of a learning experience. Thank you guys for trucking through with me and my congested nose. Hopefully I don't sound that congested, but again, shout out to those that helped out with this, gave their input. I really appreciate you guys. Everyone, stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.